Telling a story isn't about perfection. It's about communication. It's about our shared moments together. Hi, my name is Jeff Price, and I would like to welcome you to Intentional Musicianship, where we look at everything that goes on at center stage and the preparation behind the scenes needed to transform your performance into an unforgettable experience. I am here to encourage you, support you, and generally have a great time being united together with you through music. After a wonderful performing career as a storytelling musician around the globe, my joy is found in empowering musicians to find the freedom to go beyond the music stand and the fourth wall of the concert stage to better engage with their audience members. This podcast isn't a classroom, it's a brainstorming session, and it is meant for musical performers of all ages. Together, we'll explore performance practice, stagecraft, the nuances of storytelling, and the strategies for genuine audience engagement. We're here to discover what truly makes a live performance resonate. Being a musician is one of the most athletic, physical occupations that you can probably have. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's show. And the reason why I say this is because the level of focus, intensity, the energy, the drive, the dedication, commitment that you have when you're performing, I bet it rivals all of those different sports that we typically think of when we think of being physical. But being physical on stage is really important. And I've said it a bunch of times, but it's true that we do hear with our eyes. And there is something special about going to a show because we want to not only just witness and hear the performance, but we want to see that physicality, those things that captivate us and engage us from the stage. Because there's a real appeal to that for us as the audience. It might be that synchronization of the orchestra, all those bowings come straight down from the concert master. It might be that unified breath of the brass section. Maybe you're doing like this big John Williams and you just know it's coming. And everybody, the whole audience can almost take that breath and just know it's going to happen at the exact time. And then you have all those other visual elements, especially like for those percussive instruments and that striking of like a mallet instrument or the playing of a drum set, the intricacy of the hand and foot coordination for someone like an organ player and pulling all the stops and doing things. There's a lot of things to be admired, and it's one of the reasons that audience members go to the show. And I think a lot of it is that we basically live vicariously through musicians. As I season every day, when I go to shows, I get rejuvenated. I get encouraged by the musicians on stage. And not only are they playing better than, ever, but I love when they're interacting with each other and they're interacting with the audience and they're doing different things to accentuate the parts, a little almost like choreography, so to speak. And it becomes motivating, and it's almost, it's like when you're watching sports on TV. I think there's studies that, when you watch that ball bounce back and forth, it's almost it's almost like you're a pet and you see the ball and you want to go fetch the ball. Well, when you're watching these musicians and they're just so dynamic playing, if you're, even slightly like me, you can almost put yourself in another realm, another world, another dimension where you're going, man, I can see myself doing that. Oh, that would be so cool. The years of practice to be so liquid on a piano keyboard, to go up those 88 keys and just be so effortless. But I'm telling you, there's something that just draws you in from that physicality. You can oftentimes think of comments people say after the show, and people have different styles of how liquid they are, or they might be jerky, or they just might manhandle that particular instrument in that phrase just like you would a sack of potatoes or something. So when I think of this physicality, I think about a couple recent shows I went to, and I can sort of demonstrate some of the things and what the audience was sort of thinking. Now, the first one, I went to see a colleague of mine at the local college, and John Morrison is his name, and he always gives a show every year and he plays piano. And every time I go to the show, without fail, I start asking the people about why they're sitting where they are. And some people want to see John's facial expressions as a piano player, and some people want to see his fingers on that keyboard. And it's really interesting because John's a little bit more introverted than what you would think on musicians, but on that stage, he becomes very involved and engaged because he's playing this big percussive instrument, this piano. And it's funny to watch everybody see where they sit based on the preferences of the kind of things. And there is something special, that connection with an eyebrow raise or that breath or that nod or that little pulse with your shoulders. It's almost like, music really, is composed of these dances and this physicality that we have. It's almost like, you're in ballet and you're in dance class and it's just an extension. It's just a natural part of being a human. And so this physical movement is sort of natural. And so when people are watching that face and watching the shoulders and watching your body, that is, I think, just the human part of music. One of my bosses always used to say when he's thanking the audience for being there that night, he goes, be a great piece that we just played. He goes, wow, if that doesn't get your toe tapping, you better check your heartbeat. So there's just something natural about us being engaged with the players as they get engaged. And what I noticed when John plays on that keyboard, it's fun to see how he might lean in and go to one side of the keyboard and how he might have to balance his left and right hand and how he has to do the crossovers and how to have that perfect balance so he can actually play the dynamics and play those melodies and harmonies in such a way that it's even and metered and it comes out to us really well. He has to be really focused with that. And I think of things like the breath as being just one of these great connective points with the crowd. I like to think of people like being either mouth breathers or nose breathers. And it's funny because a lot of us, when we play, especially a woodwind player, we sort of breathe like vocalists to the degree that, we take a deep breath in and then we just blow out. But a lot of these instrumentalists, like string players or percussionists and piano players, people that don't have to breathe into their instruments, sometimes will not have that natural breathing like with the line. And so one of the things that you can do is just a tip is maybe assess yourself if you're on one of those instruments to see if you're breathing with the line. And the reason why is we as the audience see this and we connect and understand. It's almost like that wink, wink, nod, nod. I'm breathing, I'm entering now. And we understand that. Now, it's funny because when John plays, he gets in the zone. And I think a lot of piano players and a lot of musicians end up doing this. And so they're playing this phrase. And so John will breathe in, but then you can see him just sort of breathing out through the line or the overall period of the phrase. And it's really fascinating because, and I could see people when they went that because we're all just sort of going with him. And he's got this feel, and you can see when he's going through the keyboard work and then he's lifting like a sustain pedal or any one of the pedals that just sort of accentuate the piece. And we're sort of going with that. But it's funny because he's sort of nose breathing and mouth breathing. And we're all following this because, if you're on that side and you're watching it, that becomes part of the show. Now, similarly, I was fortunate, went to go see the symphony play. The West Virginia Symphony came through my area. So they came over here to Fairmont State University. And hey, can't not go to a show 2 miles from my house. And so I went there and, small little chamber orchestra just with the twos instrumentation, two, 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 two. Turns out they had to hire 3 or 4 percussionists for this. And then they had some really cool Korean instruments as well. But in general, I'm talking about like the string section. And so they had this lady, Taya Ricker. I'm not confirmed on how you say her first name, but she was the associate concert master. And so for this concert tour around West Virginia, where they came to some different locations, they're based in Charleston, and Charleston's around 120 miles away. So they came up to see us in Fairmont, and Taya was the concert master. Now, she's always the associate concert master, but on this tour, she was the principal. And she flies in from New York City, where she's a freelancer, grew up in North Carolina, just an amazing musician, very into physical fitness. We're not going to necessarily talk about all the different things about physical fitness, but she's very engaged in keeping herself healthy and all the things that go on with that. And it's striking because you definitely need this. Now, as she plays the violin as the concert master, she's sort of setting these bowings, but we as the audience, we're sort of watching her. And she was more pronounced than everybody else. And how she bowed, that group sort of took another life from her. And so after the show, I asked her, I said, so is it different from you just like playing section violin or associate concert master than when you're actually out here as the concert master? And she said it was because she had a role to play. And so I think in the same way, when you're on the stage and you're presenting your solo and you're playing with different groups, depending on what you're doing, you have a role to play and perform. And so you can really get into it and enjoy yourself. And she was just absolutely amazing. Now, being physical, you can tell each of us is physical to some degree on stage because, we get in those complicated sections. We start to tap our foot or we try to keep time in whatever way. One way that we can optimize how we do this is just sort of think of that music as a dance. And we want to think of that sonic form that it sort of gets us to bop as we go along. And obviously, some things are a lot more complicated, but you can almost think of yourself as your own drum set. I learned that from my buddy Lauren McClung. He was the lead player of the Jazz Ambassadors and one of the composition arrangers later on, and he would always come and sub with the concert band, and then ended up being with us full time. And he's just an amazing musician. And his subdivision was incredible. His feel for the strong beats was great because when he played, he internalized it like he was still playing in the Jazz Ambassadors and being that lead player, lead alto player with this jazz ensemble, because he became his own drum set. And so, as he played the different parts of his body, um, he internalized it in such a way that you had that pulse and that rhythm. And internally, that allowed him to be more effective and keep that beat and that pulse. And then, it had this nice lilt as we were watching. And so it really did become this show in itself. Nothing obtrusive, but you could just tell he was engaged and always a part. And so that was one of the things I took from him as one of my mentors. And that really is just one of the things we're looking at. And you can really tell from the audience when you're looking at that ensemble if they're engaged with one another, if they're dedicated to the music together as one unit. Oftentimes they just get aligned up. It's like a synchronized swim team that everybody is bobbing at the same time, everybody's bowing at the same time, everybody's breathing. It's a really important part of the show. Now, I could go for days over these kind of physical kind of concepts of the things that you might do on stage, but I wanted to give you a couple things to think about and maybe that you can practice to maybe enhance your own performance. And of course, the first thing is just to always videotape your playing and seeing what you do, right? Sometimes what we think we're doing isn't exactly what comes off to the audience. And so in the same way that we're looking at our choreography and our staging of the show, we want to make sure that our physical mannerisms are complementary to what we're playing and not distracting. I get it. We all have a head bob at a particular time, and sometimes that's just life. But if we repetitively become an obstacle to the music and the audience, those are things that maybe we have to figure out. And it's sometimes hard to figure that out. Another recent show I went to, an amazing young musician is just so physically engaged on stage. One of the things that sometimes happens is we get into this repetition and we don't notice that we're doing the same thing. We're starting the entrance and we're always doing it in this same dynamic way. And, around the 20th or 30th time that you're doing it the same way, the audience visually can sort of become numb to it. And so it's good as you videotape and you have people maybe critique what you're doing to try to soften these things and to do it with great intention. So you might just have to modify a little bit about what you're doing. It's the same thing that when you're going through dynamics and articulation and fingerings, and you have some subtleties of how you want to address things, that hopefully that comes off the stage to the audience in our ears. And there are things like that with our physicality that we want to do to make sure that that gets across so it sells the music more effectively. And one of the things that we can also do with this is, a lot of us are around places where we have those dance studios or theater programs. They have these big long mirrors along the wall. And that's so, we can watch ourselves when we play and we can perform. And so we can sort of self-diagnose in the same way we do the video. So you can pick and choose which thing that you like to do and just sort of see how things feel. Now, when you're trying to figure out how physical to be and what you can do, sometimes we're just limited by the instrument. Sometimes we have our own physical limitations. Some things just don't work as well. Tine thing brass. I think of the tuba sitting in a chair in the middle and everybody doing movements and physical stuff around that might be more typical to other brass instruments that can stand, because it just wasn't practical in this case for like the tuba player to stand the whole time. They didn't have things set up like you did for Drum Corps International for that kind of a tuba or anything like that. So sometimes you just got to be natural with things. I think when you're looking in the mirror and you're trying to see what things come across physically, there are things you avoid. There are some things that might lead themselves to overuse injuries or injuries in general. I know when sometimes people bring their marching characteristics and marching elbow and marching forearm and things into the a setting on live performance, those are things that I would recommend that maybe you reevaluate when and how to use that. Sometimes we all get into some different habits, and while we might be able to do it, sometimes it might not be worth it in the long run. It might cause an injury in the long run. So I know that sometimes, you're really working on your hand position and some of those things. So even when you're trying to do this physicality, you don't want to go astray from your great hand position you've developed, because you're playing this instrument and it does take a lot of accuracy and finesse with your hands, for example, for a piano or an instrument to play accurately. So just be mindful of the things you do. Now, there's this guy, General MacArthur Hambrick, and he's been involved in many theater productions and dance productions around the country. And he's one of the associate professors here in dance at West Virginia University. Like you, I try to learn from the people in my community and what they bring and what they teach. And I was really impressed last year. He came up and did a choreography class with the saxophone studio that I follow a lot up here. And it was interesting. So we had all these people with $3,000 to $6,000 instruments, and he was getting them to move. Now he wasn't a saxophone player, but he is a musician and a conductor and all this stuff. But he was just trying to get them to loosen up. And it was funny to see the Instagram videos of people spinning and moving, and you can almost see the corporate heart stop on the video as these thousands of dollars or instruments are going through the motions like that. So as you practice some things, who knows, maybe you get your second instrument out. But he was getting people used to what you could do. And I think that was great, because I think sometimes as musicians, you think of yourself as just being static on stage, and you breathe in, you blow out, the music comes out, and it engages the audience. But as we've been discussing today, there is a way that you can be yourself and you can encapsulate that music and what you're trying to say and make it come out. And sometimes that means, you practice, maybe you mark on your part like you did in marching band, face instrument to the left, move instrument to the right, press bell to the front. Make sure to, we always have the big breath in there. So now with the big breath, we might be able to give a wink, wink and a nod to the audience and bring them in as well so that they actually feel comfortable. When I think of these things about what you're practicing, one thing I think of is the audience comfortable? What tone am I trying to set? And I've mentioned breath a couple times, and I think that's important because if you're walking and talking with someone and you never take a breath to talk, and the person that you're talking with, they can't tell when they're supposed to come in or what they're supposed to do. And so in the same way, if you're playing on stage and you just sneak in all the time, well, if that's what you're trying to do, to sneak in because that fits the tone of the music, that's great. But if you breathe in and breathe out, we as a participant in this case will also do that and we'll be a part in a greater way. We're going to almost synchronize with you. Again, we're part of this. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that we'd like to talk about today. But, all these things from that synchronization of movements between players, that engagement and passing off of music from one to another, that expressive body language that you convey that you're actually engaged with the music. You're trying to make sure that these high energy pieces, you think about all these viral videos of all these groups, it seems like they saved the fun piece for the end, which is interesting. They save it and they finally move. After a 50-minute show, minute 51, they're allowed to move for a minute and a half, and then they wave their hands, bow, and they say goodbye. And there's nothing that says that you can't engage properly and choreograph your show with this physicality through the entire show as appropriate. Now, as we close up, I just wanted to say that, one of my greatest joys of being on the stage was looking at that audience, letting them almost know what was happening, the secrets that I had that I was getting ready to play. Maybe this part was difficult. Maybe I was relieved to get that section done. And so you have a lot of nonverbal cues that you can have just in the same way that you would speak. And you can do those with your instruments. And that's why that exploration, like that General MacArthur handbook did with the studio, why you have the mirrors and why you can look at yourself, why you can videotape yourself and look at those things. And in the end, you're trying to be yourself and you're trying to connect with the audience and sell that piece. And I think when that comes together, you're going to have more audience engagement, audience participation. They're going to have freedom to actually be a part. It's one thing when you just play on the stage and, for lack of a better term, you're very static. But when you give that nod to the audience and you breathe and you emote towards the audience and you engage them, they do link in, they do synchronize. And I think that's an important part of being a great musician. Now, if you like some of the concepts and ideas that we talked about today, I would love for you to reach out and talk to us here at Intentional Musicianship. I have the link in our show notes, but it's just intentionalmusicianship.com. I'd love to hear your feedback on some of the ideas that we presented today and get to know your specific needs better. Each of you are personally welcome to schedule a free meet and greet Zoom call. Don't worry, this isn't a hard sell or anything. It's just a way that we can start to build a relationship together. That's it for today's episode. We hope that some of the topics and issues addressed today will be useful to you as you move forward in your musical journey. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for joining us today. We know your time is precious, and we really appreciate that you have taken the time to listen to us today. Consequently, we'd like to hear from each and every one of you. You can reach out and connect with us at intentionalmusicianship.com. My hope is that we build a community where we can encourage one another through our mutual experiences performing live music. I look forward to connecting with each of you again on the next episode of Intentional Musicianship.